Too long, didn't revise.
Yo, what up, welcome to a little revision video on the Reconstruction part of civil rights. So for a brief overview, the aim was to reunionize America after the Civil War between the Unionists, which were the North, and then the Confederates, which were the South. And the main aim in civil rights wasn't really a moral one. Instead, it was kind of just to balance out the economies, since the South had boomed massively off slavery and was doing quite a lot better than the North. And Reconstruction ended in failure relative to its goal. Obviously, it wasn't a complete failure. They're not slaves anymore, so it's always pretty good. But compared to what it was trying to achieve, it didn't. Now, Lincoln was a Republican, which were the good guys for civil rights at the time, since the shift hadn't occurred yet. And in 1862, he put out the Emancipation Proclamation, which would abolish slavery if the Union wins the war, which was basically just a calls to arms. And so after they won the war, he passed the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, which abolished slavery and meant that around 4 million slaves were freed. I'll put it in quotation marks there because, they're not citizens. They basically don't exist. And so then they had 40 acres and a mule, which was part of Special Field Orders number 15, where 400,000 acres of southern land was distributed to ex-slaves, and so they would literally get 40 acres and a mule. They don't really know how to run farms, so good luck. And then you also had the Freedmen's Bureau, which was set up in 1865 as well, which provided relief in housing, employment, medicine, food, etc. Basically, all the necessities of life. But as with most welfare schemes, it lacked funding, and so was shut down in 1872. So next off, you got the 10% plan, which utter genius. So if you have 10 people in a room, 9 of them want to kill you, and the one person doesn't. You wouldn't want to put a gun in that room just because the one person doesn't. So 10%, Jesus Christ, genius. All I can say. So then you also had sharecropping, which landowners would employ black Americans for the share of crop produced, which would be like ridiculous numbers to basically push them into debt, while they enjoy all the money that comes from the crops that they didn't grow. And then because of the 10% plan and having the government's back, they could put in the black codes, which were basically the pre-Jim Crow era laws. So it had restrictive legislators such as the poll tax, anti-vagrancy laws, etc. And Lincoln died. He was assassinated in 1865. Sad times. Next on the list is everybody's favourite person, Andrew Johnson, who was a Democrat, so he was a bad guy for civil rights at the time, and he served as the vice president to Lincoln, which, is kind of genius on Lincoln's part. Yes, I will get a member of the opposition party as my vice president. Great. And so because of that, when he ascended after Lincoln's death, he vetoed many civil rights bills, including the 1866 Civil Rights Bill, which ended up becoming the 14th Amendment. So he was in a constant battle with Congress, specifically the radical Republicans, who constantly out-vetoed him since they held the majority. And so because of this, they could pass the Military Reconstruction Act in 1867, which divided the South into 5 military-controlled zones. And also, because Johnson vetoed the 1866 bill, they just constitutionalized it instead, so it became the 14th Amendment in 1868. So they had citizenship and equal protection of law to everybody who was born in the US. Unless you're a woman, then you don't. But it also is extremely disgusting that it took them 3 years to become citizens. And so eventually, because it was a constant battle where you have a Republican Congress with a Democrat leader, they tried to impeach him, and he survived by a single vote. Lucky guy. Now, I always like to remember Grant as the guy who just kind of got things done. So he was a Republican, he was an ex-Army general for the Union, and 3 important pieces of civil rights legislation came under him. I've not listed one of them as it's more relevant to the next slide, but you got the 15th Amendment, which made it unconstitutional to deny the right to vote. However, it was a bit crap since it contained loopholes such as the poll tax, literacy tests, which were all justified on the grounds that they applied to both black and white Americans. They did, but the actual implications of them means that the black Americans don't have the right to vote, while the white Americans do. So the 1875 Civil Rights Act made it so you had equal rights to the usage of public facilities, which included the jury service, schools, transport, etc. And as I said, the other one will come up on the next slide. But it's also important to note that because of the 10% plan, the economic depression in the southern states as a result of losing slavery, which is the backbone of their economy, the Democrats were now making a resurgence in politics. So now we move on to racists. The actual exam terms are white supremacists or white activists. I prefer racists, and there's a general trend where basically anytime any new civil rights legislature was pushed through, they kicked off. So there are two main derogatory terms they use that you need to keep in mind, and that's carpetbagger, which was a northerner who moved south during slavery for financial gain, and then a scalawag, which is a southerner who was sympathetic towards black Americans. So the most well-known racist group now is the Ku Klux Klan, which was formed in Tennessee in 1865. Their main thing was lynching, and their height of violence was between 1869 and 71. However, relative to the time, the White League were far more dangerous, and they were also allied with the Democratic Party. So there's two main events for them. You've got the Coxsackie Massacre, where they forced 6 white Republicans to resign from office and murdered them in front of a black audience for being scalawags. And you've also got the Battle of Liberty Place, where due to the Military Reconstruction Act, troops were in New Orleans, but because of a yellow fever outbreak, they were removed, and 5,000 White League members insurrected New Orleans for 3 days straight before they were shut down, and then both black and white Americans in New Orleans lost the right to vote temporarily. And then we finally get on to the aforementioned third civil rights thing to do with Grant. Also important to know, racists really hated Grant. So the final one that Grant pushed through was the KKK Act in 1871, where martial law, which is basically the authorities not having any consequences for their actions, was active when dealing with white supremacists. So now we move on to the build up to the end of Reconstruction with your boy Hayes' presidential election. So he made a compromise in 1877. Where the Democrats, who, as mentioned during the Grant slide, were making a bit of resurgence, so the actual election itself was a lot closer than the previous ones during Reconstruction. And so they made a compromise with Hayes that basically they would withdraw from the presidential election if Hayes promised to put an end to the Military Reconstruction Act, which he did. He won the presidential election, and the Military Reconstruction Act's gone. And so because of that, the southern states who got their governments back from the 10% plan now had full autonomy back, meaning no more reconstructing could be done. That's the end of Reconstruction. Hope it was somewhat helpful. If not, sorry. See ya.